Penn State football recruiting machine never sleeps. Even when it is not the focus, it is churning in the background. But today comes into full focus because we are in recruiting season. January means junior days. Junior days means prospects. Prospects means a bunch of names here on the show. And a guy who knows all the names and is here to tell you about what they mean is recruiting expert Ryan Snyder. Ryan, welcome back. It has been a while since we've had a full-on official recruiting show with everything going on with the football team. Glad to get back into the rhythm of things on our Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday schedule. I feel a lot better having you here in the seat talking about recruiting on a Thursday. So welcome and thanks for getting back here. I know it's been a long time to get all that stuff taken care of.
Yeah, recruiting's back in full swing. Of course, the staff hits the road today for the start of the contact period. Technically started last week. They had a couple of the graduate assistants, recruiting assistants out on the road while Penn State was obviously prepping for the Orange Bowl. But now the majority of Penn State staff I expect to be out on the road today, and it won't be a junior day this week. I think they're going to try and actually be out on the road Saturday at least, which isn't normal. Normally, obviously, they're back in State College over the weekend, but they're going to try and make up for it a little bit. I think at least Saturday, and then next week will be a full swing of coaches on the road, and then we'll get into junior days next Saturday, and then the following Saturday on February 1. So yeah, here we go.
Yeah, and before we get into all of that, we do have to clean up some more news from the Penn State football team proper that happened since the last time we were on air. It has been a good rhythm to get us off the top of the show. Penn State is retaining more players. Generally, it's good news, and that's where we're going to start today with Dom DeLuca and JB Nelson returning for 2025. I don't think there's much of a surprise with Dom DeLuca. I know the reporting at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, not surprised that JB Nelson is returning. I want to get into that just in a little bit from kind of a big picture perspective. But for you, off the top, what are the implications? What are the ramifications of getting two more veterans back for the upcoming season?
For sure. Well, you can never have enough depth on the offensive line. So I think that's big. And of course, JB is a player who is kind of a swing player, right? Can help him in a few different ways, predominantly a guard this past season, of course, but certainly can help in other ways. I think he played a little right tackle, I believe, UCLA game, something like that. It was only a handful of snaps, but either way, he's a swing player and a guy that, like I said, you can never have enough depth there. So I think that's good. And then obviously Dom DeLuca is going to probably end up being a serious contributor next year. I would think, just looking at the linebacker board. Well, it really depends on Keon Wiley, I would assume, and how he's progressed. We've heard nothing but good things about, how he's progressed from his injury and all that. So I think, Wiley, DeLuca, obviously Rojas will be the three guys you really kind of look for at that linebacker position next year. And, we'll see with Specca and Tamir Robinson. Am I missing anybody? I think obviously Tyler Elsden's done and Kobe's head of the NFL. So
then it's just a bunch of other, promising freshmen where you have Kari Jackson. I think that'd be the main name of just kind of, and Dakari Nelson. An interesting guy where I think probably a wild card in that room of what's the progress and what's the upside. Where does he fit? So I think but I think you nailed it in terms of Wiley and Tony Rojas and then Dom DeLuca as the guys that play.
Yeah, DeLuca played almost 400 snaps this year. I thought DeLuca played some of his best ball towards the end of the season too.
Healthy.
Yeah, just from a grade perspective, look at different analytics. His best three games, I think, were the three playoff games. Of course, the SMU game was, I think the highlight of his career so far, you could say. So happy for Dom, man. He's just awesome story, right? James has talked about all the time about how, player got injured and walked on and trust the staff. And, I think he redshirt his first year. And I think he's played every single game but Illinois this past year. I think Illinois he missed, but he's at least been still on special teams in every single game the prior two seasons. So it's an awesome story to be a walk-on and to contribute the way he has. And, of course, now he's a serious threat or, big time contributor, we'll say, on that defense. So excited to see how he progresses. And, obviously Tony Rojas is going to be the guy that everybody has circled next year at linebacker to take that next step. And Tony did in some ways, and in other ways, he's still got a lot of progression to do. But we'll see how that linebacker room shapes up.
I guess the part about JB Nelson that I'm interested in, and I'm not trying to signal any sort of danger here, but it just is curious that they are retaining so many players and they have so much depth and talent at the offensive line position. You've got 7 players that are possibly starting caliber or have the ability or have started games for Penn State. How do you keep all those guys happy? How do you keep all those guys satisfied? Because I understand you can come back and have a competition in the spring, and then that can also lead to decisions later. I'm not trying to spell doom or anything. I'm just trying to paint what I see as a really interesting situation of there is a lot of talent, but when you do have that much talent and you do create that competition, it does create the downside, which is guys that should or could start maybe don't get as many snaps as they think they would like to. So I guess how do you view that going forward?
I mean, what other options? Look, the guys who are starting, right? I mean, Shelton and obviously Venga and Nolan Rucci came in there, like Donko, like they're all younger than JB. But what other options does JB have, in my opinion? Like I see the young guys like Cooper Cousins and Javen Williams. Like Javen Williams especially would be the one I kind of have circled, right? Former 5-star player, hasn't quite cracked the rotation yet. He's played some, but hasn't really been a guy that they rely on in key moments. He would be a guy that I would have circled as somebody to watch as far as the spring goes and his progression and things like that. But Rucci is just already transferred from Wisconsin. Penn State family. You can't see him really going anywhere, right? Yeah. I mean, I think he's really happy with the progression, and obviously you have your 4 core guys who were your starters this past year coming back, and I think keeping Venga is big because I know schools were interested in Venga. We'll leave it at that. But I mean, I think Venga could be a day 2 pick down the road. I think he could be a top 100 kind of draft pick maybe next year. I'm really impressed with his progression this year. Still plenty of growth to do, but maybe Cooper Cousins fills in for Sal, and maybe it's a fight with JB Nelson, and who knows, maybe TJ Shanahan will get in that mix. We'll talk about him in a little bit, but look, it's again, you can never have enough depth on that offensive line, and man, I thought their O-line this year was one of the better ones we've certainly seen under Franklin, and now everybody but Sal's coming back, it looks like. So, man, really excited to see how they progress and grow. And I mean, you got Nick and K-Tron back there, and obviously Drew's coming back. There's a lot of reasons to be excited. Actually, real quick, do you remember our last podcast? I was trying to hint at the fact that, like everybody was talking about portal, and I was trying to be like, when we get to the end of the season, guys, I think you'll maybe understand a little bit why Penn State maybe hasn't been aggressive for these like massive names, these guys that are going to bring in, $1 million a year or something like that through the portal. And I hope fans kind of now see what Penn State's plan was there. Obviously the 3 core guys on offense, and then and getting Zane and Nittany to come back was big. I was curious to see if Kobe would come back, just from perspective of when you look at what the NFL wants at linebacker, how does he quite fit that? But 2 things with that. Like, one, I've seen a lot of people with Kobe. I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but with Kobe, a lot of people were like, well, I wish he learned from his brother's mistakes and didn't leave early. I would also flip that and say, well, maybe he did learn from his brother's mistake because his stock is as high as it could ever be, I feel like, after this season. And, certainly, sure, he could come back and have another massive season, but I don't know that it could get much better than what he just had. And I know everyone.
We also have to define early, because he is a redshirt junior. 4 years in college is not early. Having a 5th year of eligibility, if you're a serious NFL player, there is a part of the evaluation process that says if you're that old, that's late. And so, like, there is a balancing act of he's 250, he's 6'1", as you mentioned. His stock is never going to be higher from a play perspective. So it is absolutely on the timeline in a reasonable aspect of how he's going to go to the NFL. He's never going to be an elite coverage player from a physical perspective at his size with his skill set. So you're not coming back to fix deficiencies in the areas where, if you're going to do draft evaluation and profile, like, those things are what they are. He is a run first defender with great awareness and plays with, his eyes, and is a smart player. And that's how he wins in coverage. Coming back doesn't make any of those any better. Like, they are what they are. You can get better at learning football in the NFL when you're doing it full time.
Yeah. So I know I put on Twitter the other day that I thought Kobe King was the most important player on Penn State's defense this year, and some people agreed. Others pointed to the Orange Bowl of him in coverage and those two big pass plays. I still kind of look back on that and kind of wonder why Tony Rojas wasn't in that position there. I obviously they wanted Tony, I assume, to spy on Leonard, but
he blitzed on one of the plays,
and got nothing out of it. Yeah, I know. I went back and watched that live at the time, but again, like for me though, Kobe, like he was just the player that they could not afford to lose. And you kind of saw that a little bit in the Fiesta Bowl when he went out for a drive or two. I think that's right when Boise went right down the field and scored. The way their linebacker depth worked this year, I think he was Penn State's most important player. The one guy they couldn't lose. Was Abdul more impactful? Absolutely. But if you lose Kobe King against UCLA and you lose him for the season, I think that this defense would have looked a lot different over the back half of the year.
Yeah, for sure. So the other half of what's going on with Penn State football is a couple of losses to regional team. And I don't know if it's necessarily losses in certain perspectives. Cam Miller decided to leave Penn State and he picked Rutgers. So we've talked about the positive additions and the retention, but that is not the only part of the story. Cam Miller going to Rutgers, I find interesting that that's the match in the end. What's your assessment on Cam Miller's time at Penn State from when he was a recruit from Florida to now?
About what I expected. I mean, again, obviously everybody's mind is warped with the trip, right? The Orange Bowl. Yeah. Cam made plays at times and let up plays at times, right? It was good, not great. But I mean, he was a solid player. And I think going to a school like Rutgers is probably a good pickup for them. And I could see him certainly being a good contributor there. I know I think they have one or two guys who are maybe draft eligible this year or next year. They have decent depth, I believe, at Rutgers. So I'll be curious to see kind of how he fits in there. Like that's actually one position I think Rutgers is decent at, or at least in my opinion.
They produce good corners and they have good corner play for sure.
So yeah, so I mean, I'd just be curious to know his options, right? It's so late in the cycle. What were his options? Was this something that was being worked on behind the scenes, prior to the Orange Bowl? It's hard to know so many details, and especially when we're this late in the cycle, they move so fast. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Trey and Omari are making decisions here in the next couple of days. They're going to have to with the way class schedules are starting. So it's hard to know what Cam's options were, but I wish him the best. He's always been a good guy, and I know Penn State fans can't get that trip out of their head, and I get it. I mean, it was I know Drew's interception will be the play that everybody points to, but the allowing that touchdown as easy as it did was just as backbreaking, if not more, in my opinion, when it comes to how the Orange Bowl played out. But I think Cam's a decent player. I don't know if he's a future NFL guy. Maybe I think he could get a chance, but long term, I'm not exactly sure. So Penn State has plenty of depth there at cornerback, though. They'll be fine. I don't think they're too worked up about it. And I will also say I felt like last year there was talk of Cam maybe going in and he came back. So there's always been kind of whispers about, Cam Miller could be a guy who moves on.
Yeah. I think it is there's two aspects of this. First off, what a player presents themselves as an athlete and as a prospect, and then what their play style is. And I was just thinking about these things, and he's a good zone corner. Rutgers plays a lot of zone. They play a lot of and aggressive zones in a lot of ways where you need guys that can trigger and explode downhill and understand and read and react. And if there's one thing he was good at, it was that. And I understand there were some missed tackles there, but the play that you're talking about was in man coverage, which is interesting because I would say coming out of Florida, he was primarily an athlete. I would have said you look at his profile and his skill set and his feet, and that's a guy who can play in man coverage. And sometimes those things don't necessarily work out. So I think just from what I know of what I've studied of Rutgers, they play man coverage. So it's not like they only play cover 3, but they play a lot of off coverage. They're aggressive with that. I think he also has the chance to play outside corner for them in that, understanding that, right? So understanding that they don't play as much press man coverage and they do a little bit more from, I think, a traditional zone defense concept and personality. It's a good fit where he's going to have an opportunity to play an important position. I can understand if you go from a starting outside corner in the Peach Bowl to suddenly they bring in 2 transfers and now you're a slot corner who's splitting time with another guy, that your career trajectory probably wasn't going exactly the way you expected it or wanted it to. And that's where, I don't have the same opinion of Cam Miller that everybody else does after this past season. I think he still is a player that can definitely be a good college corner, but the system and the fit were not to his strengths. And I think that's where I've kind of landed on his career at Penn State. Anything else there?
Perfectly said. I mean, you follow that stuff better than I do, so who am I to argue it? But yeah, wish him all the best though. He's a good guy. I mean, look, I know fans are frustrated with the wide receivers and stuff too, but Trey and Omari, they're more loyal than you think, right? I mean, the moves had to be made. It felt like all these moves were just kind of a matter of time, at least with Omari. I mean, Trey was the one I kind of wondered about a little bit. Omari, there was talk of that for a while. So we'll see. We'll see where things progress, and Kyron Hudson and obviously Ross will be coming in, and man, excited to see those guys play.
Yeah. Elias Coke, we had the conversation yesterday.
Yes.
This is our soft transition. Actually, before we get into that, I do need to tell you today's sponsor, just because I'm going to put it off even a little bit longer, taking a look at the clock here, is My Perfect Franchise. If you want, not a New Year's resolution person myself, I don't believe in set just that. It's more about, can you set systems and processes in your life into motion? Can you create habits that actually lead to the changes you're looking for, not just making goals and checking things off a list? My Perfect Franchise can help you with the next phase in your life. Sometimes you got to make big changes, and this would be a big one for a lot of people. If you have middle management experience, you have business experience, and you want to take that and make money for yourself, as opposed to making money for somebody else, and then you get a small percentage of it. That's how you build wealth. That's how you build the American dream, is to own your own business. And Andy has done that for himself. He has made this transition getting closer to a decade ago than not at this point. And he wants to share that information with you of what he learned about franchise management, buying into businesses, running them. He's done the good. He's done the bad. He understands the pitfalls and can find the right place for you. And this is the thing about Andy, is his services are 100% free, and he's not trying to just sell you on something. He wants to know who you are, what you're good at, what your situation is, to know if this is the right move for you. He'll tell you honestly, hey, this is not, you should not buy a franchise for whatever reason, whether you don't actually have the capital, you'd be risking too much of your future to buy into something, or if you want to buy into something that he doesn't think is a good business. He's the kind of guy that is up on everything in the business landscape of what's hot, where people are spending their money, what's important to people. And right now, health and wellness for men and women is huge. Kids sports camps, that's huge. These are just things he told me. I don't know any of this stuff. So give him a call. If you're listening on the podcast, I'll read you the phone numbers, but you can see a smiling face there here on the YouTube channel. Andy at myperfectfranchise.net or 404-973-9901. Thanks again to Andy for being a sponsor here on the BWI Live Recruiting Show. Recruiting battles are always interesting. They take twists and turns. A lot of expectation that Elias Coke would be a Penn State Nittany Lion. He's got a couple of teammates on the Harrisburg team who are already Penn State recruits in 2026. Ryan, he chooses Rutgers yesterday. So what's your understanding of this story and how Elias Coke ended with the Scarlet Knights and not with the Nittany Lions? You're on mute.
Yep. I just noticed that. Almost messed up. He was coming to Penn State, and I think Rutgers made a strong financial offer. I'm done calling them NIL offers. It's the rev sharing world now, where we just need to call them what they are. They're financial offers. And the impression I get is Penn State, didn't really want to match it. I think the Penn State always liked Elias Coke, and I think I wouldn't be shocked if they even still recruit him to some degree. Obviously, the ties at Harrisburg are strong, and they should remain strong. I don't think this would mess anything up. This was kind of just Elias's decision to lean in that direction. Penn State obviously has 3 very talented wide receivers committed. We were prepared to start calling him as an athlete if he did commit to Penn State, mainly because, yes, I think his career would have started at the wide receiver position if he came here, but Penn State was always open to the idea of experimenting with him. So I at the end of the day, I just think it came down to Rutgers made an offer that he couldn't refuse, and Penn State, wasn't going to offer, I guess, what they would have considered too much, for a player that they certainly liked, but they also have a lot of talented wide receivers still available, and they certainly have 3 very good ones already committed. So I would have been interested to see how this would have played out if it was a couple months ago before, maybe Guilford committed, or obviously the other 2 Keys and Rogers, they committed back in, what was it, July, I believe it was. So that was a little different situation then, but maybe if Coke decided to decide closer to then, maybe it would have been a little bit different. But I don't think Penn State's like losing a lot of sleep over it. They liked him, but it wasn't. I don't know. They looked at him as a guy that they absolutely must have to some degree. Again, just because of, while they like versatility, there was more questions on exactly how he fits at the next level than oh, there's 3 positions here that he could all play. It was more so we'd have to experiment and see where things go. So it's a loss to some degree, but at the end of the day, as long as Penn State's able to get another quality receiver or 2 in this class, which, man, they're certainly in a good position with a couple guys, I don't know that it'll be a major loss in the end.
Is this, because I want to get back to his skills here after this question, because I think it's interesting to the maybe parity in college football now, as much as that is a silly thing to say given where the top end of college football is going. But if Rutgers can prioritize a guy like Elias Coke and say, maybe he's not a strong take for Penn State, but if we push here, we can get a quality player that, we in years past might have just chosen Penn State because that's the better opportunity. Do you think that you've said it already, that the financial offer was a determining factor? If that wasn't on the table, I mean, I guess, does this go a different way?
Potentially, yeah. Look, this is the rev share world. We got to get used to this, where it's obviously in the collective world. Yeah, we saw that to some degree, but it's important to remember now that while Penn State wasn't competing maybe with the very top end of the NIL world as far as financials over the last couple of years, now everybody has basically $15 million to play with, and maybe not everybody, but certainly the Big Ten and the SEC, those schools. I mean, they have to commit, I would say, about 3/4 of that 20 million to football if you're serious about it. And because of that, you're going to see this a little bit more where, some guys that we think would have absolutely ended up at Penn State, go to a Maryland or a Rutgers or whatever it may be, just because of the financial offers that are out there and that schools can do. I mean, this was, I think, a big reason why Penn State was able to get some of the guys they were able to get down the stretch, is because they knew that big pot of money is expected to be there in July, and they could be more aggressive. And every school's doing that. Yeah. I mean, Pete Nakos just did a story the other day about how, 2 years ago or last year, the top quarterbacks in the transfer portal were getting about $2 million. That was like the high end. Well, this year we saw Mensa go to Duke for $4 million a year. Yep. So really the money just kind of has doubled at a lot of. Does that keep going up?
Do you think that there's a cap on that?
Yeah, I think we're a couple years away. I would say maybe another year or two. It's potential to go up a little bit more, but we're with the way rev share should work and the way the clearinghouse should work. If it all goes to plan, which does it ever go to plan for the NCAA? No, not really. So who knows how that'll work out? But in theory, it should start capping out here in the next year or two, I would think, especially once you start getting to that 105 limit. Like, again, I don't expect Penn State to have 105 guys on scholarship, but it will probably be in the mid 90s. So you're expanding a little bit from that perspective. And I just think we got a couple years down the line, we will see a leveling off. But but at the end of the day, I mean, schools are going to be aggressive with guys that they want, and obviously Rutgers really wanted Coke. And look, he's very good ball skills. There's a lot there. The speed was always the big thing, right? I mean, we've talked about that many times with Elias. It was always.
Can I jump in here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think it's funny to say that Elias Coke, given what Penn State fans think about Penn State's wide receiver room, that is the issue where if you're looking at his skill sets and what he does on film, you can have two conversations. Penn State needs more toughness and they need more at the catch point, and he delivers that in terms of physicality at the catch point. Big radius, 6'2", but athletically doesn't really fit the receiver room, especially given what you mentioned about the 2026 class and how much we've raved about their abilities in this particular group and what they've done since then. I don't think we talk enough about what Peter Gonzalez could be at Penn State as well, because he's been injured. So like there is a different profile that they're trying to build. But as a safety, I like him as a safety. But is a safety worth, and is he worth projecting that at a position maybe he doesn't even want to play? And he might be open to it, but does he really want to play safety? Now, if you're Rutgers and you say, we'll take all of those receiving skills and we are willing to, have a contested catch guy and that doesn't bother us at all, then that makes sense for what you would prioritize, what you be aggressive for. And so I completely get what the idea of they like him, they would want him, but they're not going to, when they have their eye on progressing, pushing the ball down the field, literally and figuratively with the receiver room. Exactly. Then you don't want to prioritize something that is not a priority, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all fair. So look, Messiah Hampton, Connor Salmon, there's a lot of good options out there. And they love their 3 commits right now. We've raved about Jasir Rogers and what he brings athletically. Guilford came to camp and put up awesome numbers and did the same thing Ohio State offered, by the way. So that tells you something there. And then LeVar Keys may have had the most impressive season of them all as far as the progression we saw from sophomore to junior year. So they're very happy with those 3. And when you have a handful of very talented guys out there, that makes it easier for Penn State to say, hey, look, we like you, but we're not going to match this offer. So I think that's really just kind of what it came down to in the end. We'll see if Penn State circles back with Coke or if Coke circles back with Penn State at some point. Time will tell there. And obviously it's really going to depend on, getting a few other wide receivers. I wouldn't be shocked if they had 5 receivers committed by mid-spring, just the way they're progressing with some of these guys. I feel like Connor Salmon, they're certainly top 3 or so with. I feel like Messiah Hampton, they're right there at the top with. And when you have 3 wide receivers already committed, it's a little easier to, push the gas and I don't want to say pressure, but, make it very clear to guys that, hey, look, we only got so much room. You can only drag this out for so long. So we'll see.
Yeah. The only problem is that they won't be on campus this fall. Unless some of them, I don't know if they can reclassify. Because we said that before about Max Granville, and look, here we are.
Look, I think I saw the question in the chat about what do we think about the wide receiver room? It's hard to say, honestly. Do I think Tyseer Denmark is going to be a contributor? Yeah, I do. I think that
he has to be. Somebody has to be.
And just behind the scenes though too, like the talk of what they've seen from him at practice and the growth that he's had just from a mental perspective of picking up an offense like this and learning the speed of the college game. Like everything has been very positive behind the scenes from that perspective. So, obviously but at the end of the day, it's going to really come down to Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. And, are they able to take that next step? I think Hudson, I feel good about Hudson just from the perspective of he spent 1,100 snaps at USC. He is what he is. And he's going to come in and bring leadership, and he's going to be a good, solid player. To me, it's like, can Ross be the game breaker? Because that's what they want him to be. He's got the speed. He's got the athleticism there. Can he become Tez Johnson's the lazy comparison just because he played at Troy with Jared Parker too. But to some degree, can he become that guy that, takes things to a different level? That's the hope. But we're not really, we're not even going to know in the spring. Let's be honest. We might not even know the first 3 non-conference games. It's going to go, talk to me, Oregon, which was at the beginning of October, end of September. That's what we'll find out.
I know I've said this 1,000 times, but if Penn State fans are comparing Devontae Ross to KJ Hamler was 176 pounds. I think that's off the top of my head. So he needs to gain 15 pounds this offseason to be in a physical world where he is comparable to KJ Hamler, who was a small wide receiver. And I understand the excitement and why you would love that player. But there are things that have to happen between then and now, or he has to be the biggest outlier we've seen in a while. I think that Donnell Pumphrey, it comes to mind, the name. I think he was a 160-pound receiver that was at San Diego or something like that, where he was a really productive player in college and then just couldn't play in the NFL. And this is not the NFL, but the Big Ten, the high end of the Big Ten, is as close as you're getting to the next level. So it's just, I know I'm repeating myself from the show yesterday, but it's just I can't move off of that till I see something that convinces me otherwise.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, he's not. I'm again, Tez is the lazy comparison there, but again, like they are looking for him to be somewhat of a game changer, a playmaker to some degree. And I think Kyron Hudson can be that this also, but he's also just like a 4-7 guy. You know, he's not going to be the burner kind of player for them. Where hopefully Ross is that guy. So we will see, and we'll see if Tyseer emerges. And we know what you got in Jeff Exner, and maybe one of these young guys, Peter Gonzalez or somebody else is able to emerge and surprise us all and get a couple hundred snaps next year.
So I just purely from the numbers perspective, somebody has to, because Penn State doesn't have a class of 2023 wide receiver. The class of 2022 outside of Mekhi Flowers has vacated the roster. Mm-hmm. So the backfilling has to happen from somewhere, and it doesn't appear to be from the portal with any more additions at this point. So some young player is going to have to step up. There is no other option this year other than to literally play 3 tight ends and 3 running backs a majority of the time. And I'm not convinced you can win a championship doing that.
To answer Agman, he said, does Hamler have Denmark speed? I mean, Denmark's not like a burner. What Denmark's awesome at is, his agility, his shiftiness. I mean, his cuts are just awesome. So, but I never looked at Denmark as he's not like a 4-3, 4-4 kind of guy. He's I would say probably a little closer to like a 4-6, but the way he's able to make guys miss is on a different level than the vast majority of guys on this team.
Creates separation, plays the position at a high level, and has the innate and learned skills to generate open targets for a quarterback, and then ideally run after the catch. And those are the things where he's going to have, because it's not going to be deep balls, right?
This should just be the Tuesday show. I don't know. We're just talking team. I like it.
Yeah,
it's fun. I mean, it's been a fun playoff run. So everybody coming back next year, there's plenty of reason to talk the team. But I know we do have to talk a little recruiting. T. Frank, what's our next subject?
Yeah, junior days. And so I wanted to, for people that are new, because we have over 1,000 new subscribers recently, in this playoff run. So there's probably some people that have not been with us for a January that are getting into recruiting. So let's just start with the basics, and we'll do a quick recap of what junior days are, why they're important, and what Penn State fans should expect over the next month of recruiting and player interest in 26 and beyond.
Yeah, so we call them junior days, but there's going to be plenty of sophomores coming up for these big recruiting events as well. And really, it's a day really to introduce guys to all the inner workings. And a lot of these guys who are going to come have already kind of had those experiences. That's how much recruiting has sped up. I mean, junior days 10 years ago were because, all right, we're shifting to the next class. Sure, a couple of these guys have been to games before, but have you toured facilities and done seen the dorms and all types of educational stuff? Well, they still do all that. Don't get me wrong, but again, a lot of these guys who will be coming up were maybe at last year's junior day or did a lot of those same things at the Lash Bash or whatever it may be. But, they're big recruiting events to get guys back on campus. Okay, the season's over with. Everybody can kind of focus a little bit more on looking ahead, getting a better feel for what guys' timetables are, especially now with official visits in the summer compared to, however many years ago where they were waited until the season for those. So they're an important events. I still always look at the big 3, the Lash Bash, the blue-white game, and the whiteout is like the core 3. Like if guys go to all 3 of those, they usually they hit on a high percentage of them at least for end up at Penn State. But this is their opportunity to get a bunch of guys on campus. So many of them will be offer guys. There are going to be some as well that are potential camp guys down the road that they want to get a better feel for personality, families, whatever they may be. I think the events usually are. Penn State has had them in the past where they're really big, 60 plus guys, and last year they tried to, I believe it was last year, they tried to make them a little bit smaller, a little more, more one-on-one, because, there was guys leaving, but maybe just didn't get the time they deserve. But the difference now this year, of course, is, they're only going to have 2 weekends to really do it. Where, in previous years, there's 4 open weekends during the contact period. Penn State normally always did 3 of those 4 weekends, where this year it's going to get, funneled down to just January 25th and February 1. So, we'll see that. I'll have a better feel for our list next week. Obviously, next week's show, we'll go through a long list of guys. Right now, I've got a handful of talented players for the January 25th one. I'm really looking at linebacker too for that January 25th one, because we know Nick Abrams has made it public that he's going to visit. Of course, he's the 4-star linebacker from McDonough. Caden Gephardt has made it public that he's going to visit, and also who am I missing? Oh, Matthew Kanu out of Virginia. Those all three of them are important linebacker targets for Penn State, and I do get the impression that PSU's in a really good spot with Caden Gephardt. He hinted at maybe making a decision in January, February. He's kind of dialed that back a little bit. It has nothing to do with Tom Allen or anything like that. He just has a lot of schools that want him to come visit in the spring. And, I think it's easy to say a couple of weeks ago that, I'm ready to get this over with. And then you have all these schools pressuring you to not get it over with. I think he's maybe debating on that right now. But the point is, Penn State certainly, I think, I've already put in an RPM pick for Caden. I believe we discussed that on the last podcast. But, we'll see. Right now, Penn State was the only junior day that he has set up, though, which is a positive sign. And again, he'll be here next weekend. So if there's a guy that, 9 days out that I'm really watching, it would be Caden Gephardt for next weekend. But that list is going to grow and expand. And, like I said, by next Thursday, we can really give a better feel for, who we're really watching.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about is, not asking you who, although you get bonus points for giving us a name of somebody you were watching for. But just generally, like, some of these guys have visited multiple times during the season. And so a guy like Tavion Branch comes to mind. When I was putting all this together, a guy who, Pennsylvania guy, been at camp, came to a bunch of games this fall. It feels like at a certain point, it feels inevitable. So I guess a follow-up question is, what is the average? I'm not going to ask you for a number this year, but generally, off the top of your head, how many do you think Penn State gets in this particular part of the cycle? Because what Penn State has done so well over the years, as you've pointed out, and as Fitz has pointed out on these shows, is they're able to work ahead and they're able to secure the guys they want. This feels like a big opportunity to do that. So what is kind of the view of the number you would think is good and what is average?
It fluctuates, and it's like, for example, let's go back to, I'll start with 2023, which is really kind of when junior days really got going again. That was back in 2022 after COVID and all that. That was kind of the first year normal recruiting, I guess, got going again. But for example, they got Anthony Donko and Javen Williams in 2023. So, they landed two guys in that period after those days. And then 2024 was similar, where it was Specca and Kari Jackson, I believe it was. Specca committed, I believe, mid-January, and then Jackson came for one of the later junior days, took a couple weeks to think about it, and then committed, I think, like mid-February, late February, something like that. So it fluctates, because then if you go to next year, or you go to last year, there was quite a few more, I believe. I thought it was, I'm trying to remember. Owen Alcini was January, mid-January. Oh, yeah, Alex Tash, Deshaun Burnett, Michael Troutman, all committed by like February 10th then. And, it's, again, guys don't necessarily commit during the event, but they give you enough to think about. And usually they'll hit up 3 or 4 different schools, during that open period. And, if you're close enough to getting your recruitment over, you go home, you think about it for a week or two, and then you make your move. So last year, even if you include Lyric Samuel then, who committed, I think, like mid to late February, it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys in within a handful of weeks of visiting for a junior day. So it fluctuates. I would think the over under, if you're setting one, would be 2.5, 3, somewhere in that ballpark. But once we get those lists together, I can give you a little more accurate feel. Caden Gephardt's certainly a guy, though, that, early on, he's a guy I have circled. I would just circle back to Tavion. Like, Tavion is a guy too that I kind of felt that way. He kind of reminds me of the Andrew Olish recruitment. And don't get me wrong, he hasn't blown up nearly as Andrew, but it's kind of like a guy who was like, okay, he gets his offer, and we know he really wanted this offer. It makes a lot of sense that maybe he'd be committing within a handful of months. And, now here we are in mid-January, and I get the impression he wants to wait a little bit longer and go see some schools. I know he's going to see Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's done a pretty good job recruiting him. So let's see where that progresses. The other thing with Tavion too is, Penn State has been steadfast on offensive line, offensive guard. They haven't wavered on that. Well, anyone who's watched his defensive film this year is kind of intriguing. And, he has some schools certainly recruiting him or certainly talking about defense more. I'm not exactly sure where Oklahoma stands, but I know like Wisconsin, for example, and I think Syracuse, maybe there's a couple that are really pushing defensive line. So I'll just be curious to see how that maybe impacts them, how that impacts how Penn State goes about it. Then he says all the right things as far as, I just want to get on the field and find the right school for me. But I mean, like Joey O'Brien, for example, certainly a safety. Schools are mentioning wide receiver more, and I kind of get the impression that after talking to him, he's way more open to the wide receiver than maybe I would have thought 3, 4, 5 months ago. So it's a big balancing act, right? Of finding the right way to recruit a guy, and being honest on where you think he's going to fit, but also entertaining the idea of, well, if he really wants to play this position, and that's maybe that is best, just because that's where he's happy, right? I mean, he's excited about it, where, if you put a guy in a spot where he's kind of meh on it, maybe he won't progress the way you're hopeful that he does.
Yeah. I just wanted Tavion Branch to me is a fascinating prospect, and I'm glad that more people are starting to pay attention. When you're 6'3.5", 300 pounds, and you have a pad level and hip flexibility like this guy, defensive tackle makes a ton of sense. Anywhere you need to get a lot of leverage. And so that makes sense to me. And it's just interesting to watch how these guys, the recruiting process happens in general. Yep. Any other guys that are interesting to you from the name perspective that are visiting that you have or that you want to share? And of course, the place that people can go find all of that is bluewhiteillustrated.com. Why don't you tell us about how they sign up to get that information?
Yeah, man. $1 for 7 days. I mean, come on, let's take it. Give you the opportunity to get a foot in the door and, obviously see what Sean and I are cooking up. And I see everybody in the chat, by the way, asking if Sean's dead. Yes, Sean is dead, by the way. So I don't know if he's ever coming back, but he is officially died. No, I'm kidding. He's sick, obviously, and I hope he gets better. My man came back from Miami, and I don't know what he's got, but he has not been feeling too well for the last couple of days. But we'll get Fitz back on here hopefully next week. So, but I would say as far as recruits go, T. Frank, Kari Adams, cornerback out of Loyola Blakefield down there in Maryland. I think he's a guy that Penn State's trending in a really good direction with as well. And I know he's a guy that Terry Smith's very high on. We've had a source or two mention to me about how he could be this year's Brandon Finney, as far as like a guy who really takes off. And don't get me wrong, he's already, I believe, a 4-star player and all that. But looking at his indoor track numbers and some things that he's doing right now, I'd be really kind of surprised if he doesn't start stacking up some serious offers. But at the same time, I think Penn State is the team to beat, and a guy that they like to close sooner than later if possible. So, but Kari Adams will certainly be a guy I have circled. And do we want to talk about Larry Moon going to IMG, because he's coming back on January 25th as well. He only visited twice last year. He spent a lot of last year going out and seeing other schools. And look, he visited Penn State, I think it was like 6 times during his freshman year. So he's well aware of what Penn State has to offer. But I'm very curious to see, now that he's made this move to IMG Academy, we reported on it yesterday, just how he does down there, because it's obviously a massive step up in competition. This is a guy that as a freshman, I mean, he almost has 40 offers now. I think he's like 35, 38, somewhere in that ballpark. I've heard mixed things on how his season went at Aliquippa. I still think there's a ton of potential there, and I think he's certainly going to be a highly coveted guy. But making this move to IMG, how is he able to hang with some of those talented receivers that he's going to face every day in practice? But also going against the best high schools in the nation. So it's a big move, and one that a lot of guys go to IMG Academy, and I'm like, oh well. That's not good for Penn State. I'm not so sure Larry Moon fits that, just because he's a Western PA guy, and Terry Smith also oversees recruiting in Bradenton, and in the Tampa area. So, that relationship with Terry isn't really going to change a whole lot. It's going to limit how much he can visit, obviously, and it's going to limit how much he can visit every school. When you go to IMG and you're away from your family, it's not like you can just pick up and go wherever you want on any weekend. So his visits are going to get cut back drastically because of that. Maybe that's a good thing for Penn State. Maybe it's not. Time will tell. But mainly just kind of want to see how he progresses as a player. That's the big thing right now. But he's a 2027, so there's plenty of time.
What do you think of how has Penn State recruited IMG? Because obviously the name that comes to mind and is very, very clear is Katron Allen. But I off the top of my head, I know Drew Shelton was there and then left. Are there other examples of Penn State being able to recruit guys from that make the decision to go down to IMG and then, either keep them interested or develop that relationship with players at IMG if they're not from the Northeast generally.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, in the past 3 classes, have they gotten anyone from IMG?
Not off the top of my head.
I don't think so off the top of my head. There's certainly been guys who committed and then have gone else, or then gone to IMG. I'm drawing a blank on that one, honestly, as far as like exactly their last IMG commit. I don't know this Katron. I think it was somebody else. KJ obviously went down there, but then he got injured that year. I'm drawing a blank as far as who would be their last one. Katron. I'm trying to look over some of their alumni.
It's all good. It's my patented curveball that I ask you a fact that you would have no way of really knowing unless you're a computer. So it is an interesting situation where that relationship. If guys, I know this, I'm trying to say something Fitz has said before without just copying what Fitz said. If guys go to IMG, typically relationships aren't necessarily their most important factor in their recruiting, but you're saying that this is a guy, Larry Moon, who, from our talk of him previously, it does make sense. It might be an opportunity. Just assessing these things from the distance, always wonder what's the opportunity for change of a narrative, what's the opportunity for things to go in a certain way. So that's really just what I was driving at, what I was curious about. The other recruiting news here today, and I'm gonna lump this into recruiting news. Obviously, the transfer portal is players that are on campus that have been through a college football season, but some guys don't actually play, so there's less to know about them, and that's where I want to go with Owen Wafel. We've talked about him committing to Penn State.
Wafel, good job, not Waffle. Good job, buddy.
I made sure because I know that there were a bunch of jokes, and I saw your tweet. So
it's okay. I was calling him Waffle too until I got corrected. Let's just clarify that. I'm not smarter than everybody else. I just got corrected. That's all.
Yeah, I was gonna say you crawled so that I could walk in this conversation. What sort of player is he? Class of 2023 player who committed to Michigan. What do you know about him from the recruiting process, and what is Penn State getting from a young player at that defensive tackle position?
Yeah, a guy they didn't offer, but I don't know that it wasn't because they were not necessarily interested. He committed really early to Notre Dame, and then ended up flipping to Michigan like a year later. But his commitment was very early, and I think that was kind of part of why Penn State maybe didn't offer. They were always interested. It's a good family. Like everything about him fits the Penn State, Notre Dame, Michigan kind of trifecta there of what those schools prioritize. So from that perspective, it's hard to say exactly where he was at, but I do know that early commitment from Notre Dame kind of changed the way Penn State was recruiting him, because they did get him on campus, I think, once or twice early on. But just solid run defender was always kind of the big talk with him, and it's hard to say exactly how much he's progressed because I haven't seen him, and no one really has, because he didn't really play a whole lot for Michigan last year. But I just look at him as a replacement for T.A. Cunningham, right? I mean, T.A. was kind of always a wild card young defensive tackle. They wanted to see, if he could progress. Obviously, he transfers out immediately after transferring to 16 different high schools in high school, obviously. So I wasn't really all that shocked that he left. And don't get me wrong, I think Wafel has the opportunity to be a contributor, but I think obviously they want to get him in the system and see what his strengths are as far as where his development has been, over the last year or so at Michigan. They didn't bring him in because of his brother, but it is notable that his brother Luke is also one of Deion Barnes' top edge rushers in the 2026 class. He's at the Hunt School as well. And again, that's not necessarily why they brought him here. They like Wafel's potential. And again, they needed a young defensive tackle to fill that spot. So it just kind of worked out that way. But let's not overlook the fact that his brother is also really good, and they do want him. Right. So I believe, I think Wafel went to, what were his schools? I apologize. I had my list somewhere here.
Hunt School?
I'm sorry. As far as college, Oklahoma, Rutgers, Wisconsin, and then North Carolina. Those were the three or four that he visited, was showing serious interest in, and Penn State's able to get him. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, the family is always really like Penn State. They don't talk a ton, but behind the scenes, that's been a consistent feedback I've gotten, when asking about his brother. So the family fits Penn State great. That's why he originally committed to Notre Dame, and then he went to Michigan, and now he's at Penn State. So it makes a lot of sense as far as what you're looking for.
Eric Eisler has a question here in the chat. We're going to take a quick detour away from the portal because I like this question. Wrestler, baseball player, or track star? What's the best second sport for a Penn State prospect? And he says, looks like Larry Moon is a good wrestler. I'd say basketball is the second sport for a lot of, especially the athlete positions, is really important to Penn State from the number of times you brought up, just look at his basketball highlights. That's the one that jumps to my mind.
Just depends on the position, right? I mean, when you're talking offensive and defensive linemen, I would go wrestling for sure because of the way you're able to learn, with leverage and technique and using your hands. That's where I would go with a lot of linemen. But then if you're talking wide receivers and corners, and I know Larry's a corner, I would argue track, obviously, right? Because you can never be fast enough and you can never refine those skills too much, right? It really depends. But then again, if you're talking about tight ends or defensive ends like Chaz Coleman and a lot of other guys, being able to watch them, their bounce, right, and how they're able to move on the court. Yeah. You can argue basketball. So haven't seen too many baseball as far as that goes. I mean, I
think the one that I'm thinking of is Zakee Wheatley. I think there was some conversation, and Dex has talked about liking center fielders, guys that play baseball that know how to track a ball. And so I think that'd be the one position, probably receiver, but you don't get a lot of receivers because usually it's track.
I guess if you're a good quarterback and you're a good pitcher, that kind of is a good thing. But I would certainly lean, again, like defensive lineman, absolutely wrestling, and offensive lineman too, just again, because of leverage. You can be as big and strong as you want, but if you don't know how to use leverage, you're going to get beat at this upcoming level. And like I said, with track would probably be the other one for me just because of skill players. But you can certainly argue basketball, and Penn State has taken quite a few guys not just based off of basketball film, but the basketball film is what maybe takes that guy from a guy they're interested in to, oh wow, have you seen this guy's bounce? Maybe we should go after it.
So let's talk about a guy who is, I don't know, I don't have a transition here. Sorry, I that's the first time I've fully fell on my face in a transition. I didn't have anything because I don't know what other sports he played.
But back in the normal Brian T. Frank, no excuses.
Yeah, excuses, you're right. TJ Shanahan, that's where I wanted to go.
There you go.
Penn State gets a Texas A&M offensive lineman to join a super deep offensive line room. And I think that's a really huge win for Phil Troutwine. Also super interesting in terms of where he fits, all those things. So what have you learned in your reporting about TJ Shanahan and how he fits into the picture for Penn State?
Yeah, future guard center for Penn State. Look, I mean, played 285 snaps in the SEC this year, right? And I think it was about as you would expect for a freshman in the SEC to play, right? I mean, plenty of opportunities to grow, but you see a smart player there that certainly has what it takes to play at that level. But is he physically ready? Does he know all the little tricks? And, when you're going against SEC defensive linemen, you're going to get beat up at times. And we saw that with TJ. But I think if you're Penn State, you got to love the fact that he had 280 some reps, to really get used to what the level of and the speed of the college game is. So I think that's exciting for Penn State. I think the other thing that's kind of gone overlooked a little bit, and something I kind of just recently learned is, I knew this, but I didn't really add it up, is the fact that he was coached by Steve Adazio this past year. Steve Adazio, of course, was, again, that's their offensive line coach at Texas A&M. But let's look at Steve Adazio's track. He was the head coach at Boston College. Who was the offensive line coach under him at Boston College? Phil Troutwine. Not only that, when Steve Adazio was an assistant coach at Florida, who was the player that helped win national championships there? Phil Troutwine. So there's a really, I mean, Adazio has always been kind of, I don't know if I want to call him a mentor or anything like that, but somebody obviously Troutwine's very close with and I don't want to say leans on, but has a lot of respect for, right? So that connection there and knowing, I assume there was some conversations with Adazio when TJ entered, just knowing, and getting his feedback on the player. I think that probably played a big part in Shanahan ultimately ending up at Penn State and also Troutwine wanting him. So that's big. We know he went to Georgia, Missouri, I think maybe Arizona State was the other school that he visited. So some decent schools in the mix there. But hey man, played 10 games for Texas A&M this year. I think he missed 2. I think it was Missouri and Texas are the 2 games he missed. But I think you got to be excited by the fact that he got the what is not just the experience, but you get the jitters out, right? Like what this level is now. Now you're going to be coming in here understanding that. And, hopefully, obviously, from a development perspective, Penn State can take things up a notch and, we'll see. But they absolutely think he can contribute this year. Whether he does or not, time will tell.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was a redshirt freshman that played center. And I think that's just a fascinating piece to add that if you're mentally adept enough to play center, and watching the film, I didn't see, I'm not an expert on the offensive line, but he didn't block left when everyone was going right. Like there weren't any obvious busts in his game. And so to have a guy who can handle that mentally and to bring them into a roster that already is deep, creating again legitimate competition for starting spots and for the playing time. If things, and this is again Thomas Frank going way overboard and projecting too far, if TJ Shanahan adapts well and is part of the depth chart, he could challenge for snaps at center or at right guard. There's no center of the future right now on the roster who's taken snaps at that position. Everyone expects Cooper Cousins to be that guy because that's been the story about him this whole time. But they might need him to start at right guard, and he might suddenly become an all Big Ten right guard. However you want to slice the pie, having another guy who is capable and has a future quality above average starter in Power 4 football on the roster, I think that is such a huge win for Penn State on that interior, especially a guy that can play, that I think can handle playing center as a redshirt sophomore.
Yeah, more depth, right? I mean, you can never have enough depth. I mean, they should be pretty much 4 deep at tackle this year. They feel pretty good about what they got there, and now they should be pretty. What I mean, if you include Ruley, I mean, feel very comfortable about each of your interior positions with Shanahan, Cooper, obviously Venga, JB. I mean, and Ruley too. I mean, I don't want to overlook Ruley. He doesn't get talked about a ton because he's a walk on, but like they really, really like Dominic Ruley. So yeah, I mean props to Trout, man. I remember 4 or 5 years ago whenever he first got here, right? Everybody was like, oh no, man, I don't know if this is going to work. And now you can argue that Penn State's offensive line is one of the better position groups on this team. So I think they're in a great position there. And as long as they just keep developing, NFL talent like they have been, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
That's what we got here on the show as far as what I had prepared. Ryan, what did I miss? What do you got
King
here?
Mac back, baby. The return of the Mac. How many lazy headlines did you see this week? Return of the Mac.
Yeah.
Which I debated it, and I didn't do it. I didn't do it then, but I did debate it. But hey, I mean, it's cool to have King Mac back, man. Another awesome kid. I was kind of bummed to see him go last year because I thought he had a ton of potential. And
me too, if you didn't notice.
yeah, right. But I think he only played about 100 snaps this year. Really didn't, as far as like progression on the field, kind of looked what we saw at Penn State. I mean, I thought maybe even you could argue that he played a little bit better at Penn State than he did at Alabama. And I didn't watch a ton. I didn't watch all 106 of those reps, but just from the games that I did see when he got in there, they certainly a quality player, but I think he fits Penn State really well. And, I haven't talked to him personally about it, but I would assume that, maybe he learned the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And obviously Dex and him have a great relationship. And that's why you keep those relationships strong, man, because you never know when things might circle back. So big
played him in the slot. That's interesting. They played him in the slot.
I noticed that. Yeah, I did notice that at times, but a lot of it was later in games too. He played in some meaningful moments, but I didn't see him a whole lot in those key games, I guess you would say. I saw him a little bit against South Carolina, I think, but anyway, that was a while ago. So any questions? I'm just trying to look back, see if we missed anything, but I'm sure we missed some way back in the top. But yeah, other than that, how's everybody doing? I haven't it's been 3 weeks since we had a podcast.
Yeah, I think we're gonna end here because I just need to catch up with Ryan. We haven't talked, like, legitimately, we haven't talked in a couple of weeks because everyone has been busy with going down to cover a playoff run and all of these other things. So we're gonna get going, and that'll do it this week for the BWI live show.
I don't expect Elias to play wide receiver. Sorry to cut you off. That was a question.
Yeah, and okay.
If he learns how to block, but
let's have that conversation. Because Quentin Martin's also coming up in the chat. Penn State has enough quality pass catchers. The point is, do you have a threat on the perimeter of the offense that can create space for everybody else? Having a 6'5" tight end that probably runs a 4.6 play wide receiver does not really change that equation.
Yeah.
You need to have an athlete. You need to have a wide receiver out wide, creating and taking advantage of the one-on-one matchups that you get from all of the running backs and tight ends and great process over the middle. Penn State needs to find a wide receiver. Quentin Martin, great athlete. Can he play the position, actually play the position of route depth, timing, details, being in the same spot, the same time, every single time? He's a running back. So until these things change, like these are all quality athlete options, but are they quality wide receiver options? Ryan, maybe I'm totally wrong, but like, do you think like that's crazy to like?
I think if they thought Quentin Martin was going to be a wide receiver, they would definitely try to be a wide receiver.
Yeah.
There was a year for that. It was probably this year. Again, I mean, it's about game breakers, man. They need playmakers. That's really what it comes down to. And none of those guys, I think, completely change that. That's why it comes down to Ross, man. I think we know what Hudson's going to be. He's going to be a consistent guy for them. He's going to make plays. He's going to get open. He's not going to be a game breaker though, but he's a consistent kind of player, where Ross is the one that's like, they'll be hoping to really take that step. So
we were contractually obligated to talk about receivers, or for me to yell about something when it comes to the wide receivers, and we didn't get to it on the show today. So thank you for bringing that up.
No,
but that is it.
Not always equal getting open either. No,
What's
that's why Tyser Denmark, I think, could be really good, but he's not necessarily a burner.
Right.
We'll talk about route. We got all of February to talk about nothing. Let's just talk about that then. There's nothing going on in February.
If there's any news that breaks this weekend, we'll be covering it here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. As always, thank you for being here. I should talk about this early in the show so that everyone gets to see it and hear it. But if you're watching, please like the video and subscribe. I hate saying that because everybody says that, and it's just a thing that turns into noise, but it really helps us do what we do here if you like the video, because then the almighty algorithm goes, oh, people like this. They interact with it, and then they share it with more people, and more Penn State fans who don't know about us find out about us, and we get to do more, bigger, cooler things. So thank you to everybody who is here and always does that. We will be back next week. We're back on our regular schedule, and if anything happens where that changes that, I'm going to pull my hair out. So,
and maybe Sean will come back to life. Maybe.
We'll have vampire Fitz on the show next week. That'll do it for today. We'll talk to you then.